Chapter 7, Sakura. The bustling of civilians going about their nightlife was familiar to Kakashi. He just wasn't used to seeing it from the ground. The number one rule for N-bus is that they do not exist. They were to never be seen, and if they were, well, a dead man tells no tale. He wasn't an N-bu at the moment, however, he was a regular civilian out on a stroll. A group of jonin and special jonin walked by deep in conversation. He avoided eye contact. He couldn't imagine being a jonin. He didn't want to be on a squad, let alone as a commander. The thought of being in charge of 3 lives made memories rear their ugly heads. He had been in charge of a team once. The fact that they weren't around to tell the tale spoke values of his capacities as a leader. The cheer from a nearby pleasure house caught his attention. It was a new establishment from what he knew. Then again, he hasn't been out socializing in a long time. He paused in front of the building. Sweet Paradise was written in kanji over the main entrance. The reason he was undercover in the first place resided inside. He frowned. This had to be some sick joke. Why was his target in a pleasure house? His mind went back to the meeting with the Hokage earlier that day. "An Uzumaki?" he asked. Dressed in his N-bu attire, he knelt before the old man, his mask hiding his shocked expression. Naruto was the only living Uzumaki descendant in the village, and he was only a half-breed. The only other Uzumaki he knew was Kushina. To think there was another in the village. She showed up a few weeks ago and asserted herself as a, he paused, geisha of sorts. Lord Hokage turned to look at him, then, a grim expression on his old face. "I'm not sure if she is an Uzumaki, but if she is, I'd like to know her purpose here. It's no secret that the village possesses the 9-tailed Jinchuriki. She might be after Naruto." "She would be his kin," Kakashi countered. The young Uzumaki had grown up with the love of a family. He would be delighted to meet a living relative. "That is exactly why I am worried," the third stated, sitting down. "She merely needs to offer him the love of a family to lure him away." His eyes hardened. "Wolf, you are to find the Uzumaki and determine her purpose in our village," the Hokage ordered, using his code name. "Should you find her to be a threat to this village?" Kakashi looked into the eyes of a war-hardened man. "You are to eliminate her immediately." Kakashi ensured his disguise had an extra layer of genjutsu to cement it. He wasn't sure of this woman's abilities, but it didn't hurt to be careful. He wore a wig of shaggy grayish-brown hair, and gray-colored contact lenses, along with purple makeup over his eyes and purple patches under them to conceal his scar. Without his mask, the beauty mark on the left cover of his mouth was on full display. He also normally wore a long green trench coat and purple scarf with gray pants. It was autumn and the nights were noticeably chilly. He could feel the shift in temperature as he entered the ground floor. Of the 3 floors, the ground floor was a standard cafe. People sat around tables enjoying sake and cheap food. The back was where the kitchen was located, along with a small office, or so the blueprints showed. The second floor was where the magic happened. Up these were the real pleasure house. Geishas attended to the patrons, performing various services that served as the establishment's main source of income. The third floor was limited to but a selected few. It was a space for patrons to have one-on-one with Teihuu and Warren. He wouldn't need to go there, however, as his target is new and wouldn't get a high rank on arrival. He walked over to a waitress to start his mission. "Excuse me, I'm here for the pop star performance," he told her. She blushed when she looked at him, a reaction he was used to by now. "Ah yes, right away. Your name?" She walked towards the desk by the far wall. "Sakura." She looked at him with wide eyes, understandable as he had purchased the premium membership the day before. He didn't want anything to get in the way of his mission. Having a low rank would limit his access to the geishas. With a high rank, they would bend over backward for him. The pale waitress waved over another woman in a loose orange and yellow kimono. She whispered something to her. First class, he heard, and the woman smiled at him. "A newcomer?" she inquired, and he nodded. Her smile widened and she locked her hands with his and led him to the stairs. "Right this way," she coed. They ascended the stairs and he ticked off a mental checklist. Get to the second floor, done. The second floor was much like the first but with dimmer lighting. There were low tables and cushions laid about the room, some already occupied by other patrons. The people who occupied the space were just as he expected. Wealthy nobles from outside the village. The shinobis in Konoha tended to avoid places such as these, something about not laying where they sleep. With that thought in mind, Kakashi gaped at the large number of shinobis she saw in the crowd. He knew a few of the others were from shinobi clans, there was even a Hyuga or two among them. Those proud bastards were in a place like this? The lady attached to his arm leads him to a table in the back that was slightly elevated to see over the crowd. She sat him down and poured him sake without him asking. The show will start soon, she informed him with an elegant bow. Please let us know if you need anything. She looked up at him through her lashes. That will be all for now, he waved her away and she complied. He was in and settled now, he just had to find the target. An old woman dressed in loose colorful kimono walked in from the room. Her skin was smooth where exposed but her face showed signs of aging. She blew smoke carrying a lit pipe in her slender fingers. Oddly enough she remained him of the third Hokage, or at the very least a female version of him. He knew then she was the owner of the establishment. Ladies and gentlemen, her voice was silky smooth and quieted the entire room. Thank you all for coming, we do appreciate all your support. She said, a genuine smile on her wrinkled face. Now without further delay. Her eyes twinkled with amusement as she drew on the pipe. She exhaled and an unnaturally amount of smoke enveloped her. Kakashi stiffened, noting it as a genjutsu. Let the show begin, the old woman's disembodied voice rang as the smoke cleared to reveal nothing where she once stood. The room dimmed even more, only a scarlet glow appeared on the stage, drawing everyone's eye. A figure seemed to materialize there in the form of a kimono-dressed woman. His breath caught in his throat, she was in full view. Scarlet hair was held back from her face with a pink Sakura hairband. The front of her hair was tied in a bun and held there with two fancy sticks, the rest cascading down her shoulder and back. Her silky peach skin was blushed, and the kimono fell over her shoulder. Silky pink, her kimono was held with creamy white obi tied to the back, a sign she was a geisha and not an warin. This confused him. There was no mistake, she was wearing expensive clothing, which was unusual for a geisha. She wore white socks and an okabo. Her beauty was unrivaled, even without the white makeup which we went without. Her red-stained lips pulled into a smile as she raised her head and opened her eyes. Emerald gems blazed as she looked at them, and everyone was under her genjutsu. Kakashi looked through his sharingan, the only thing left of his old teammate bit for his haunting nightmares. He saw the illusion being cast, saw it, but not through it. The genjutsu was like that of a genjutsu master, but there was something else. Fuinjutsu? He shouldn't be surprised. Uzumaki were known for their fuinjutsu, destroyed because of it. The fuinjutsu she was using used natural energy to cast and would continue even if the caster died. There was no doubt she was an Uzumaki, her red hair was proof of her strong bloodlines. What worried him was her reason for casting the illusion and what it hid. All that is near us we must know can disappear any day, be careful. The main key to finding happiness lies now where else but in my soul. Her voice seemed to be coming from all directions, courtesy of the genjutsu. Kakashi frowned at her words as disembodied music started up. Can you reminisce? Can you recall the last time you felt some joy at all? Kakashi winced. Or maybe you are so blessed to a point where you can't remember anything. Her eyes saddened even as painful memories from a time he'd never have again surfaced. It's harmony, a miracle, being able to breathe and live at all. A clone of her appeared and sang alongside her. So, here is your only chance, life is an opportunity. The tempo of the music increased and she began to sway from side to side, her long locks tailing behind her. All that is near us we must know could disappear any day, be careful. The main key to finding happiness lies nowhere else but in my soul. The closer you get to something, the tougher it is to see it, and I'll never take it for granted. Let's go. She spun, moving to the left, and 3 shadow clones appeared like after images. Some people may call it a kind deed, an act of mere hypocrisy. But never mind those who have lost their faith. You shouldn't give in to what they say. A flash to his father made him shiver. He glared at the woman. What did she know? As a matter of fact, let me tell you. Even if it was a selfish cause, salvageable hypocrisy is superior to murderous honesty. They all danced in sync, singing before striking a pose, leaving the real body to sing a long note. They abruptly burst into Sakura petals and obscured their view of her. When she did appear again, Kakashi's mouth dropped even as the patrons whistled. Gone was the elegant kimono in its place, a kimono shirt that had to have been mistaken for a dress only reaching mid-thigh. The pastel pink kimono was tied with a vibrant red obi tied in a bow at the back, its length falling to her knee, resembling a tail. Long thigh-high white socks met the too short gown, a red ribbon sewn through the top. She sang the now fast-paced song, the hem of the gown swaying, prompting the patrons to lean forward for a glance up her skirt. It didn't help matters when clones of her appeared to have another energetic synchronized dance. Everybody tells you from time to time to never give up, like a phrase from a movie. They tell you to stand up for yourself as if it was always that easy. Gather a handful of courage in my heart, to go on and survive another day. And I'll never take it for granted, she sang before her clones did the unthinkable and jumped. Let's go. They busted into petals before anyone, even his sharingan, could see anything. The petals englobed her, and when it cleared, she stood in her original outfit. She raised her head and gave a gentle smile, as she faded away like a ghost. The room erupted with applause. Kakashi leaned back and frowned. What was that? It was like she was talking to him when she sang. Even as he pandered, that was another check on his list. Locate target, done. Chapter 8. Sake with Kakashi. As the night's performances dragged on, it became apparent that Pop Star was the main event. The other patrons, while still intrigued, they were not those invested as before. They looked like men who had tasted rich wine and now have to settle for cheap sake. Kakashi was about to resume his search for his target when the performance came to an end. The old lady from before stepped onto the stage, still smoking her pipe. My precious patrons, it is now time to select the lucky customer, she said, and waitresses walked around handing out papers. His own read 42. He watched the reaction of the other patrons and was surprised to see their enthusiasm. What is going on here? The old lady answered his unasked question. The one with the lucky number will send the rest of this fine evening with the pop star herself. That got a rise out of them. They immediately began to converse among themselves. He would be able to integrate her if he was alone with her. His next objective was to get the target alone anyway, so this would work out fine. Now he only had to make sure they picked his number. Aimeko walked onto the stage with a box, presumably filled with random numbers. He wouldn't be able to get her to draw his number, but he could fool her into seeing his number. Pouring chakra into his sharingan, he cast the genjutsu. The old lady didn't react to being out under an illustration, such was its subtlety. She reached into the bee and pulled out a paper. She looked at it while drawing on her pipe. With a long exhale and a cloud of smoke, she smiled. Our lucky winner is number 42, she said, tossing the note away, causing the poor Mako to chase after it. The crowd erupted into cheers despite their loss. If the lucky winner would be so kind as to make his way to the stairs, someone will guide you to your prize. Kakashi rose, gaining the attention of almost all the patrons. He winced under their piercing gaze. He felt uncomfortable under their gaze, and he felt like glaring. He fought the urge and made his way to the stairs, where the lady who escorted him up waited. The old lady drew the patron's attention, as she reached into the box to select another person for another one of her geisha. With his back turned, he failed to notice the paper once tossed away had the number 42 upon it. The third floor, according to his research, consisted of only large rooms used for lounging and entertaining patrons privately. As they reached the top steps, they were greeted with a hallway of many sliding doors. Murals of mountains and oceans adorned their walls, each impressive on its own, but together they created a masterpiece. At the end of the wall before the turn was a door with a mural of a whirlpool in an ocean surrounded by mountains and mist. Uzashigaku, the thought entered his mind immediately after seeing the mural, the village hidden in the whirlpool. The woman led him to that door, and he watched as she knocked on the door and waited for a response. Yes. A soft voice came from within the room. He recognized and was quite pleased his miss was going so smoothly. Your guest has arrived, his escort called back. There was no shuffling of clothes, no telltale sign the performer was getting ready to greet their guest. He did hear a sigh, however, before she called back. You may enter. His escort bowed and drew back the doors to reveal the room. It was a spacious room, lit with 4 lanterns in each corner of the room, and one hanging from the ceiling in the center of the room. A low table sat on the right side of the room, 2 sake bottles and cups atop it. The opposite side revealed a futon surrounded by cushions. They looked appealing, but he had no intention of discovering how soft they were. There was a balcony facing the entrance, on the 3rd floor, which would give someone a great view of the city, and potential customers. Before it, in the center of the room, in a low bow of crimson hair cascading down her shoulders, was his target. In the dimly lit room, she seemed to radiate with beauty. Emerald's eyes looked up at him through thick lashes, a small smile on her pink glossy lips. He stepped in and the door closed behind him. The geisha stood and approached him. She took his elbow in hers and led him to the low table with the sake. He stopped halfway there and she looked back at him confused. Will you not drink with me? Her voice was smooth and pleasant to his ear, a walking temptation. His eyes drift from her face back to the balcony. He saw nothing there naturally, but his eye said what stood before him was a lie. Sir. She said again, and he had to resist the urge to glance at her. He stood there for a good 2 minutes before anything happened. He heard a sigh and the geisha before him turned into sakura petals. They flew to the balcony and revealed her. She sat on a low bench adorned with soft pillows he hadn't seen before. There was a sake bottle in her hand that she drank from while glaring at him. I hadn't realized this establishment condones ripping off their customers. He said in a light tone, smiling at her. Her brows furrowed as she looked at him, as though trying to solve a puzzle. She stood and strode over to him. She didn't appear hostile, but it was apparent she loved to use genjutsu. He had to be vigilant. You are an Uzumaki, aren't you? He said, starting the interrogation. What makes you think that? She began to walk in circles around him. The red hair, he stated matter-of-factly. His ears trailed her as she stopped before him and twirled a lock between her fingers. And what if I am? She walked over to the low table and poured herself a drink. What does it matter? She downed the drink and slammed the empty cup down. I'm curious, what brings you to our village? He continued his questioning, disputing the glare she offered. Mine was kinda destroyed, date bayo. So excuse me for wandering into your village. She snarled. Kakashi winced only on the inside. Outwards he raised his hands in surrender. I didn't mean anything by it. So you're staying here now then? He needed to know what she was after, if anything at all. She chucked and rested her elbow on the table and her chin in her palm. No, I'm not staying. After a few more gigs I'll be gone, date bayo. Something flashed across her face, an almost pained expression before it was replayed in a lazy smile. Is that all the questions you have? She stood then and took the unused cup and a bottle with her as she walked to stand in front of him. Cause if so. She placed the cup in his hand and poured him sake. How about we get back to the reason you're supposed to be here? You mean the reason you saw fit to cast an illusion on me? He caused help but ask. She didn't react to his words, merely smiling and walking over to the balcony. She sat down on her bench and smiled at him. I wasn't expecting company, was all she said. She gestured to the cushions on the left. Now sit, I'll play you a song. He looked over to the arrangement of pillows and then back to her. Koto was suddenly before her, slender fingers hovering over the strings. He complied and sat on the futon, and yes, they were as soft as they appeared. He couldn't help but sink deeper into them. 2 sake bottles were to the side and he picked one up, pouring a cup full. The note of the pulled string vibrated through the room, his eyes landed on her, and she seemed at peace as she played. A melody of notes bounced off the wall as she played a song. It was so soft and soothing, that he found himself with his eyes closed. The bright, green field of grass seemed endless around him. Laughter reached his ear and he searched from which it came, only to pause in wonder. Rin stood in the field, her short brown hair dancing in the wind. She looked older, now dressed in a jonin outfit as opposed to her black shirt, white skirt, and purple leggings. She laughed again and the man in front of her became more animated in his tale. His black hair was wild, his going wind and goofy, unbefitting the jonin jacket he wore. His right was covered in much the way Kakashi's own was. It wasn't until he turned to look his way that he saw who it was. Obito Uchiha, his teammate, was taller and much like Rin looked older. Kakashi. Rin called, "What took you so long?" Obito folded his arms behind his head and grinned at him. The left side of his face that was crushed was forever scared. It didn't hurt if the way he grinned widely was any indication. "Sorry about that," the familiar voice came from behind. Kakashi spun, and blonde hair and narrow blue eyes adorned a handsome face. Minato Namikaze, his sensei, didn't change at all. "We had to drop off Naruto at the academy," he said, walking by Kakashi and giving him a nod. Minato walked over to them and they dived into a lively conversation. Minato was bragging about his amazing son and how he's making lots of friends. Rin rebuked him, saying his son is a troublemaker and too much like Obito. The man in question laughed it off, saying if Naruto was like him then surely he will become Hokage. They all laughed at that and Kakashi basked in the sound. It had been forever since he heard it. You've heard their laugh every day. His mind tried to fool him, but he knew it wasn't true. He would think this an illusion if not for its improbability of it. The caster would have to know his team intimately to have pulled off an illusion like this. No, he was fairly sure this was a dream. If nothing else, it was better than the occasional nightmares. He had expected the images of their deaths to flash in his mind, but only the scene before he played. He was grateful for that. He heard his name and focused on Obito. "Yo Kakashi, tell Minato-sensei how awesome I was in that fight yesterday," Obito demanded. Kakashi had but a second of confusion before his memory was filled. His team had apparently gone on a mission to subdue rogue Cloud Ninja. A smile worked its way onto his face. This was but a dream, he knew, but if only for a little while, he'd like to pretend it was more. "I seem to remember that encounter rather differently," Kakashi spoke with ease, taking a step towards the group and then another. "I had to drag you out of a forest fire you caused." His words had the desired effect and Obito rapidly begun to defend himself. This may have been not but a dream, but he would be damned if he wasted this moment. Kakashi woke to the face of the lady who had escorted him. She began spouting excuses once she could watch him sleep. Sitting up, he ignored her in favor of observing his surroundings. He was still at the pleasure house in the same room. Everything remained as was when he fell asleep except one. "Where's she?" The woman stopped her rambling and followed his gaze. They fell upon a koto that sat atop a low table in front of the balcony. The woman's eyes lit up with understanding and she quickly explained. "Lady Hannah has retired for the night," she said. "She only works until 10, so she had left while you were asleep." He hadn't realized she was on a time deadline. He assumed all geishas slept in the building. "You're welcome to spend the night, of course," she continued. "Most of Ms. Hannah's clients usually end up in the same state as you, so we have a system where you will be allowed to sleep here. No additional fees required." She smiled at him expectantly, though he couldn't figure out why. He stood and sorted his clothes as he thought. "I initiated contact and interrogation and got the answers the Hokage asked for. I should report back to him." Mind made up, he excused himself, much to the geisha's disappointment. He left the building and walked a good distance in the smaller crowd before flickering away. I see. The Hokage sighed after Kakashi finished his mission report. He had long since retired for the night and sat in his sleeping robes in the meeting room. Kakashi had told his commander of everything but his dream. He didn't see the relevance of it. Well, from what you have told me, it would appear she is only here to raise funds. His eyes were tired but he seemed to relax. Let us hope it remains that way. Her skills with genjutsu would be rather hard to combat if even the sharingan cannot see through it. Kakashi had been under a genjutsu the moment he stepped into that building. He wasn't sure what they were hiding of, if it was just to appear more appealing. Either way, he hasn't been able to dispel it and soon found more being added to it. Perhaps an uchiha would be better suited to combat her illusions, Kakashi suggested, already thinking of the young uchiha, Itaki. The Hokage hummed in acknowledgement. He looked out the window and sighed again. I am much too old for this. It was a whisper but Kakashi heard it. Though he remained in his kneeling position, choosing not to acknowledge it. Get some rest, Kakashi, it's been a long night. Sir. With that, he flicked away into the night. The moon hung high in the dark sky as she made his way home. He hummed a newly discovered tone almost unconsciously. His voice rang in his ears. The key to finding happiness lies nowhere else but in my soul. Should he meet her again, he would be sure to ask what she meant. Chapter 9. Mission. The traveling craftsman looked down on my blueprint, lost in thought. It's doable, he assured me, but chakra iron is expensive. I looked down at the illustration of visor glasses. They were unmistakably futuristic, though not my intention. It was more practical than stylish. The framework was to be made of metal, chakra metal. Those were found in the land of shade and were very expensive. With the ability to channel the chakra, it was the perfect ninja tool for a ninja with exceptional chakra control. By applying chakra to the blade, one could increase its cutting ability. That wasn't what I wanted, however. It was light and could work much like a chakra conductor. With little to no technology, I had to improvise. Fuinjutsu would work like programming, but I still needed hardware. The glass was less complicated on the surface. It was to be made from sand. As you can imagine, I had to make it complicated. I needed it to be sand from a village hidden in the sand. Why? Well, if you must know, I want sand infused with natural energy. The sand in the wind country is, or more specifically the hidden village that has been tamped with for many years. From the monk sage that first acted as a vessel for one tale, to the constant rampage it goes on when loose. Its sand and the sand in the village have mingled to the point it's indistinguishable from each other. The craftsman looked at the requirement and then back to me, arcing a brow. It was specific, but I needed what I needed. I hope you're not expecting me to be able to acquire these materials myself, he said bluntly, as though talking to an entitled child. I pouted. I had in fact expected him to get them and take my money as compensation. I groaned, thinking of actually going through the proper channels for the material. My eyes wandered to the Hokage Tower. I didn't have a choice. You said you'll be in the village for a while, I said, taking my scroll and rolling it up. That's right, he said, gonna be here for at least 5 months. Need to raise money for an escort mission. I hummed in understanding. Traveling the country is a dangerous affair if you weren't ninjas. Bandits, rogue ninjas, wild beasts, and more. It didn't help that he would be traveling with materials. If I get the materials, you'll be able to do it right? I asked, not for the first time. I had seen one of his crafts. He made many things including glasses, and he made one for one of a vendor. He groaned, having to answer this question more than once. I only had one shot at this. If he failed, I would need to take all the money back, and that would be a bother. Yes, he said, I'm one of the best in the land of fire, which is why I travel. I searched his eyes again, and when I couldn't find any deceit, I groaned again. They won't find your body if you're lying to me, I said matter-of-factly. He chuckled but nearly choked when he said with a very serious face, I promise. I've made weird things, and what you want isn't too difficult. especially with all those instructions," he said in a rush. I calmed myself and looked away. "Sorry, I've worked hard for the money to have this done," I explained. "I can't imagine there are many jobs a child as you can do," he said with sympathy. "Not without first graduating from the academy, that is." He amended, "As a shinobi, even one as young as I, there were many jobs readily available. I'm off, I'll return with the materials." I walked away and ignored his wishes for luck. This was a setback, not a large one however. I would just draw attention to myself by submitting this to the mission desk. I could ask my parents to go in my stead, but that would raise the question, where did you get this money? I had an answer, though they wouldn't like it. I wasn't a fan of lying to them, so I decided what they don't know can't hurt me. As I feared, all eyes gravitated to me as I entered the tower. After failing to locate any shinobi affiliations, such as a headband, I was dismissed. It wasn't uncommon for academy students to wander into the building, being right next door. It was their duty, however, to prevent me from wandering too far without supervision. This was a pain. I walked up to the front desk and the lady behind it smiled down at me. I returned the gesture, if only to be polite. "How can I help you, sweetie?" she asked with the patience of a Seth. I wondered how many children she had to deal with on a daily basis to build up such a mask. She didn't look like she expected anything too important from me. "I don't want to be here either, lady. I'm looking for the mission desk," I stated, surprising her a bit. "I want to commission a shinobi squad, please." I added the last bit to show I was serious. She looked at me in awe for a bit before her patient smile returned. "What kind of mission do you need?" Her voice was calm and almost mocking. It irritated me. "A retrieval mission, D rank at most. I'll need them to travel to 2 different locations to retrieve items, though I'll need to sit down with them and explain the specifics." Halfway through my speech she lost her smile and stared at me, dumbfounded. "Do you have the money required?" It was the only thing she can think of, I'm sure. "I think so," I said, summoning the briefcase filled with my hard-earned money. I cracked it open to give her a glimpse. Her jaw dropped and I closed it and sealed it away. "I just hope it's enough," I mumbled. The woman sat frozen for a bit, before she called over one of the interns wandering the hall, and instructed him to take me to the mission room, VIP client. The intern, a young man, looked down at me in awe, before ushering me down the hall. He guarded me as though I was a princess that stood as the only one capable of saving her people. I had expected to go to the huge room Team 7 was in when receiving missions. Instead, I was brought to an empty room with soft sofas encircling a small table. "A briefing room? Stay here," my escort instructed. "I'll get someone to receive your request." Someone to hear my mission request, hey? I suppose it made sense. Can't have random people commissioning shinobis with a ridiculous request. I nodded in understanding and went to sit down on one of the sofas. It bounced with my weight. The room was cozy and warm, perfect for making someone let their guard down. Left alone, my mind began to wonder. There wasn't much time left before the Uchiha massacre, only a few months. I had spent enough time with Sasuke for him to be sick of me, and yet I can't get enough. It wasn't fair that I would lose the man I love for plot convenience. That was all it was, really, fruit for a tragic backstory. The death of so many only served to give Sasuke character development and Danzo a handful of eyes. Danzo, the name makes me scowl. He was a spiteful and delusional man. He wanted to be Hokage just like all young men, but he was a coward where his bravery was the right path, and so Hiruzen Sarutobi, his best friend, became Hokage, and still is despite his retirement. You would think losing to his best friend would appease his jealousy, but his hatred only grew. Hiruzen, of course, is blind to this, never suspecting his longtime friend and teammate could ever be bad. Just like Orochimaru. I was beginning to see a pattern. Our Lord Hokage likes to only see the good in people. He is a bit naive for a leader. I could see why Danzo despises him. He is not thinking of the betterment of Konoha, or "I do this in the name of the village." Those were the famous line of the great Danzo himself. See? Delusional. He wants the hat so bad he would experiment on children. Scum. He was one of the reasons I didn't want to draw attention to myself. Who knows what he will do if he thinks you're useful. The room door opened and a lady in glasses stepped in. She gave me the once-over with an unreadable expression, before stepping into the room and closing the door behind her. "Are you the client?" she asked in a serious tone. She was a shinobi, I noticed from the graceful and soundless way she walked. "Yes, I am," I answered simply. She nodded and sat down next to me, sinking the seat and bouncing mine. She wasn't too imposing, more like a stern teacher than anything. Her job was to make the client feel comfortable and safe. She was really good at it, it seemed. She wasn't overly curvy, but the shape was there. Her long navy hair spilled over her shoulder and onto her white, almost nurse-like dress reaching mid-thigh. Her dark brown eyes focused as she arranged her paperwork. "All right, I'd like for you to go over the mission you wish to commission," she began after she was satisfied with her arrangement. "Don't hold anything back now." She gave me a gentle smile a mother might give their child. It wasn't a patient one but rather an encouraging one. I was quite pleased even though I couldn't discern if it was real or not. "I need materials," I explained, "chakra ore from the land of shades and sand from the village hidden in the sand." I took out a seal designed to locate natural energy-infused substances. "They'll need this to locate the specific and I want." She rose a brow looking at the seal tag but otherwise remained silent. "I also have a deadline of a month. I need the materials sooner rather than later." I finished. She wrote down what was said in a scroll, before reading my instructions back to me. I nodded, pleased with her efficiency. "You didn't give a specific amount," she warned me. "Ah, I had forgotten." I took out a small scroll, handing it to her. It had the measurements of the materials needed. I had the craftsman write down which kind of glasses would be required and how much. We also decided on a price. It was high, but considering he had to make the glass and shape them himself without breaking them, I would give him a pass. She hummed as she read over the list. "This shouldn't be a problem." She looked at me then and smiled, pleased. "As for payment, it will depend on the level of difficulty. The sand village has a treaty with our own, so it shouldn't be a problem to get the sand. The ore will have to be purchased, so finances will be needed for that." She glanced at me and I nodded. "I'd say this is a D-rank mission and one of the most affordable." She did the same calculation, adding the cost for the ore and travel fee as well as taxes. 4,000 yens, she said, and I sagged in relief. I thought it would be more. I smiled, nodding happily. She smiled at my eagerness. We signed a bunch of contracts, and I was required to pay half now and the rest after the mission was completed. I was all too ready to have this down. "When do you think the mission will get assigned?" I had to ask as she was packing up. "Tomorrow at the latest. It needs to go through the Hokage for approval, but your mission is fairly straightforward, so it should go through without issue," she assured me. I nodded as she left the room. "You can come by tomorrow to check on its progress if it makes you feel better," the mission lady spoke in a conversational tone. "Normally we would send someone to summon you when the mission is complete. If it is during the daytime, I would likely be in the academy," I replied, already warming up to her. "I'm the only one there by my name, so it shouldn't be too hard to retrieve me." She nodded. "Indeed, your name is unique and oddly fitting." She glanced at my pink hair and I blushed. Dad and his poor naming skills. We were in the middle of talking about bad naming skills when I felt it. It smelled like a blood-covered forest. The scent of blood and trees fought for dominance. There was something else there, something familiar. The feeling of being watched washed over me and I hid behind the lady. She looked down at me in question before the sound of wood against the tiled floor sound. Clink, clink, clink. A rhythmic tapping came from down the hall, that for some reason was suddenly dark. From the shadows, a man in white and black robes emerged. He was covered in bandages, his hand in a sling. There were bandages around his right eye and forehead. The tapping sound came from his cane. He walked with a wooden walking stick that he leaned heavily on. The woman bowed with respect and announced his identity. "Good day, Lord Danzo. My eyes widened and trembled as he looked down at the woman, her bowing all but exposed me to the man, and hurried to mimic her. Of all the people, why did I have to run into him? A crow cried, and the image of a grinning Uchiha filled my mind. His hair was dark, short, and messy, his eyes were friendly and smiling, and his eyelashes were far too long for a man as badass as he. Shisui. I had met him on numerous occasions. He never failed to tease me about my love for Sasuke, or attack his jealousy. He was comfortable to be around, not too loud or imposing, yet not calm either. His was a song of chirping birds, a crow in there every now and then. Sasuke and Ataka had adored him, and I had wanted to learn the body flicker, and he made Ataka no emotion blush. I had a moment to wonder why I felt his chakra here when I heard the sound of wood on the pavement again. At ease. His voice was unmistakably old and rough, yet it made my skin crawl. That's right, he has Shisui's eye under his bandages. He walked by and the woman slowly began to rise. I felt his eyes on me, but I didn't look up and instead acted like the terrified child I was. If one gains the interest of Danzo, they might end up like Shisui, at the bottom of a river, or worst, like Yamato. I kept my eyes on the ground in a sign of submission. Nothing interesting here, just a child scared to death of you, a regular old Tuesday. He walked by, his kin echoing in the hallway as he disappeared. I sighed with relief. That's odd, he doesn't usually walk this way, she was talking to herself, but the lady's words filled me with dread. I looked up at her confused, she noticed, and smiled. That was one of the councilmen, Danzo, she explained. If he's here, it's likely for a meeting with the Hokage. His office is on the other side of the building, so most people just walked from that entrance. This was the longer path. He doesn't usually walk here. She began to walk again, oblivious to my turmoil. If he is truly crippled, which I know is bullshit, then he would want the path that would be easier for his old bones. At least if he wants to give off that image anyway. I ran to catch up with the lady. Danzo doesn't do unnecessary things. My stomach squeezed with anxiety. He couldn't have been here for me. Apart from the briefcase full of money and the summoning, I don't really stand out here. Were they talking about me and he overheard? He might have thought to investigate, if only to see what the fuss is about. I had trembled before him, that makes me unappealing, right? My mind was swimming when I left the Hokage's tower, with so many questions and no answers. I was also a bit angry. I knew he had taken Shisui's eye, but knowing and seeing are two different things. He would take many Uchiha eyes as well, not just him but also Obito. I felt sick just thinking about it, them having Fugaku's sharingan. That was also a thing. The massacre was used as a power-up for those two. I snarled. It was too late to try and save the clan. There were too many that wanted a civil war. Tired of being oppressed by the villagers, they planned to overthrow the Hokage and take over. I couldn't convince them to stop. I doubt even Fugaku could, but I could still throw a wrench into their plans. It was with this mindset that I bumped into Rabanda Hyaga, a young lady from the branch family. She was out shopping for the family. She was kind of like a maid in that regard. We greeted each other and she went into a long talk about the compound and recent activities. Somewhere during the conversation, my eyes drifted to her bang. She was a part of the branch family, so she had a seal there that was made to control them. It also destroyed the byakugan upon their deaths, as was the case with Niji's father. I paused as a thought entered my mind. It was plausible and it would be a perfect revenge. A cruel smile crept its way onto my face, making Rebanda pause mid-sentence. She knew the smile was infamous. When this smile was on my face, someone was going to suffer. Sakura-chan, she said cautiously, backing away. Say, Rebe. I grabbed her wrist before she could escape. Can you do me a favor? They were gonna regret ever crossing my path. Chapter 10. Step on the path. Shinobis do not allow for weakness. In the academy, they taught us the rules of the shinobi world. They were mostly there to prevent us from getting a weakness. For instance, the rule that says, Shinobis must, no matter what, never show emotions. To show what troubles you, is to show how to defeat you. I have several weaknesses, all of which are the people I've grown to care for. My family and friends. It was to be expected that I would get attached and would do what was necessary to preserve their happiness. That love was the reason I was going against the plot in the first place. It was a selfish desire to keep things as they are for his sake. There was a plan in the works. My enemies would see in-laws wiped off the face of the earth. Naruto's family was scattered to the wind, but at least they were alive. If they succeeded, the Uchiha clan would be down to 2. My mind went to Obito and Madara, for I conceded, even if they would not be counted among the living. The counter plan was simple: the Uzumaki got to survive so long as they were not spoken of. Perhaps the Uchihas could suffer the same fate? Even with the plan in mind, many factors stood in the way of it. A forest covered in blood. Danzo. It was luck, I suppose, that he didn't send Anbu after me. I had stretched my senses looking for the slightest movement out of place. There was none. Even so, I wasn't dumb enough to believe my sensor abilities were a match for Konoha's elite. Something was thrilling about the idea of being hunted, if only to lure them into a dark alley and spring a trap. A predatorial grin split my face. I couldn't wait to see their face once they realized, they have lost. The scent of lavender and the burning scent of alcohol reach my nose and bring me out of my musings. I looked down at the forgotten beaker, the liquids bubbling. I turned off the flames and allowed it to cool. My plan had many phases. There was pissing off Danzo and saving the Uchiha. The liquid before me would be a stepping stone for the latter. It was a concoction for a perfume. It smelled of lavender, but that was only to hide its true scent. Shinobi were very knowledgeable when it came to poison. Even if they do not specialize in it, the average shinobi is expected to at least have to identify with an unusual addition. Wine could only burn so badly before someone realizes it's killing you. They are expected to know the smell of problematic herbs and poison. Kunoichi classes were already teaching us to identify poisons from medicinal plants. Since spiking someone's drink was out, I had to improvise. The knock at the door was a welcome sound. I had been getting anxious, thinking they wouldn't come. And wasn't that an unusual feeling? I walked over to the door and pried it open. Rabanda stood in the rundown hallway, eyes shifting around, cautious of everything. She looked like a drug dealer selling in front of a police station. I know what we're doing was a crime somewhere, but did she have to look so guilty? Commissioning Rebe's help was simpler than I thought. I merely mentioned it was for Suzuki and she gave in. I might have begged her in front of a lot of people, and she may have been embarrassed if the blush was anything to go by, but that was neither here nor there. I smiled at her pout when she finally looked at me. I gestured for her to enter and she looked down to the hallway again before doing so. She looked about my lab, which was really just a rented apartment in the lower district of the village. It was cheap and spacious, not proper for a living but enough for myself. It was a one-room apartment, and the kitchen area was marked by the island and the cupboards. I store my contained and ingredients there. The cooling beaker sat on the island. The scent of lavender fills this room, which would otherwise smell like herbs. I remembered having to clean the entire space when I first arrived. Now the place was covered with a navy blue carpet, a bookshelf against the wall filled with scrolls, potted plants littering the floor. It was my replacement for the den in the forest. I wouldn't be able to use there forever. I would soon grow too big for the confined space. The room was almost as comfortable and practical as the den. When I became a shinobi I would be able to upgrade, but until then. Rebe looked about as though a trap was about to spring. "You ready?" I asked, startling her. She flinched and looked back at me worried. "You never said what you need from me," she said, voice soft. "Only that the Lord wouldn't like it." "True enough, what you don't know can't hurt you," I said, stepping forward. I hadn't bothered telling her of my plans. The fewer people who know the better. "Shall we begin?" I placed a hand on her shoulder, smiling in what I hoped was a calming gesture. She grimaced but nodded. "You're doing this for love," she whispered. "I can respect that. Know that you have my eternal gratitude." I squeezed a pressure point and she fell unconscious. Gently I lowered her to the carpet. I tucked a pillow under her neck for her comfort and got to work. I brushed back her bang to reveal her seal, a simple X with 2 lines to its sides. It glowed green with chakra as I observed it. Placing a hand on her forehead, I concentrated. I pulsed chakra into the seal and it began to grow and expand. Inked kanji replaced the simple design, spreading all over the room and taking up the carpet space. I looked around amazed at the new knowledge the seal provided. The Hyaga curse mark was more like a self-destruct seal than anything. It responded to a specific chakra of signal and the lack of life. The seal targeted the brain, or at least the part of it responsible for sight. By disturbing the chakra flow through the coils behind the eye, they can cause great pain to the victim. A pain that attacks the chakra system itself. It would be useful. I would have to modify it greatly to make it not as permanent as the original. I took notes of it and returned to the primary objective. The loss of their eyes after death. The birdcage seal seals away the byakugan after its host has died. It is to keep the secrets of the Kekii Genkai hidden. The seal cannot be broken, or if it can be, they encrypted it beyond my understanding. I inscribed the information down, making a copy of it. The easy part was over now. I had to compose it into a simple seal and tag it on its victims. The seal is said to fade upon death, taking the dojutsu with it. There would be no evidence if one didn't want the eyes. Even then, what could they say? What is this? Their eyes no longer have any abilities. And just as would they know that? Why would it matter if a dead uchiha did not have his sharingan? It is not like they have a use for it. Check. I would have him cornered. The Lord Hokage surely won't act on it. Such a shame. Rebe awakened soon after. We had tea and wisely decided not to talk about what happened during her nap. We instead take about the Hyaga household and Hanabi, Hinata's younger sister. If memory served, the child would become a prodigy and become the heir to the clan. She was able to match and surpass Hinata in combat. While Hinata was soft and caring, Hanabi was determined and hard-working. Naruto acted as Hinata's training partner on most days and Neji and I on others. The two Hyagas still spar, but it's rarer. Thinking back, I don't believe the elder liked me very much. I suppose it was Naruto's presence around the heir. They didn't act hostile toward him, not anymore at least. Naruto's bright eyes and goofy grin had won their heart for the most part. Or at least proved he wasn't a danger. Rebe informed me the council had raised concern. Having something so dangerous inside their home seemed to imply a rebellion. I snorted at that. It would be tragically hilarious if they decided to massacre the two dojutsu-wielding families. They would cripple Konoha and start a civil war. Next, they would prosecute the Yamanaka for their mind-reading abilities. The whole situation was ridiculous, more proof the Hokage was incompetent. Dusk found me in front of the Uchiha shrine. The energy coming from it was unmistakable. It wasn't human. The Sage of Six Path, he wrote on a tablet residing under the shrine. His essence even now still clung to it, along with something else. From what I remember, the more developed the sharingan, the more knowledge one received. Only a shame he had to go and ruin everything. I glared at the thought but ended up glaring at the shrine. As impressive as it would be to see you set fire to something with only a look, the voice came from above, causing me to look up. "I'll thank you not set the shrine ablaze." "Father," I called out, delighted. His scowl only made me more pleased. He hated when I called him that. He's convinced what I have is a childhood crush that will disappear over time. The boy is wrong. He leaps down before me. His police uniform seemed to want me. I liked his casual wear better. He seemed too official to win the shinobi get-up. "What are you doing here?" he asked in a stern tone. "This is Uchiha's sacred ground." There wasn't accusation in his tone, more along the line of annoyance. I smiled as he signed and threw myself at his legs. "Father, can I ask a favor?" I smiled up at him as he shoot daggers at me. What is it? His tone was that of patience. Good enough. Can Suzuki stay at my house tonight? I asked. I've never had a sleepover before and I believe it would be a great experience. He looked down at me with emotionless eyes. No. The statement was accompanied by a kick of his leg throwing me off. I performed a triple backflip to dispel the momentum. I stopped in a crouch, a pout on my lips. Why not? I said it like a question. My parents said it was fine and Suzuki would want to, even mother agrees. You're the only one to object. I knew why, of course. He was a doting father. Why would you want a sleepover now so suddenly? He asked. He was too smart for his own good. Itaki isn't any about and I wanted to spend more things with Suzuki and Naruto. It wasn't a lie, it just wasn't the whole truth. Fugaku knew that and he glared at me. His eyes seemed to search mine for deceit. I thought only of Sasuke's smile and gave him nothing. He sighed after failing to discover my motive. If Suzuki agrees then fine. I leaped at him in pure joy. He caught the back of my neck and held me away. Such emotions are unbecoming of an uchiha is what he always said, only proving he approved of Suzuki and I. Fugaku had his own ways of showing affection, you just need to know where to look. We walked in comfortable silence down the shrine steps. I could feel the presence of others watching us all around. Some were uchiha, others likely Anbu. Fugaku must have seen he was still on high alert. Does all uchiha go to the shrine? I asked absently. At least once in a while, yes. What about the priest and priestess? We gave up that tradition a long time ago. I hummed, during the war. Before that. He stated. The Sengoku Wars, I mean. Fugaku didn't pause in his step and didn't change his expression. He did however look my way, his eyes glowing red. Yes was all he said. We women and children allowed to fight back then. Curiosity got the better of me. Women no, male children yes. He said. Women were needed to ensure the bloodline didn't die out, we could afford for them to fight. I had thought of Fugaku being a teacher and couldn't help but smile. It's not the same now, is it? I said, acknowledging the difference. Women can fight now, and are pretty strong. My mind went to Tsunade, she was a legend. Mothers and untrained are not allowed to fight, along with the elderly. Those incapable of fighting are not required to. I hadn't thought they would be so lenient. I thought of a new question and worded it carefully. So if another war broke out, not all the uchiha would be expected to fight. I was close enough to draw a parallel but far enough to be harmless. Fugaku looked at me with dark eyes. He was trying to see into my soul again, and once again I thought of Suzuki. My face transformed to one of true bliss, my eyes hazy. He groaned at the look on my face and answered. No, only the table would be sent to fight. He looked to the sky, the unable are to stay behind and preserve the bloodline. So mother would have to stay behind. It seemed unlikely since she was so badass, but Ataki would likely be expected to fight, leaving Suzuki alone if they didn't return. She wouldn't like it, but she would have to be. Someone had to take care of Suzuki. She stated. His eyes were distant. You could always leave him with me, I said, trying to calm him. I have no complaints about carrying on the bloodline. I grinned up at him, completely serious, knowing thus Fugaku reacted. I say it coming, whether I could dodge it or not is debatable. The fist crashed into my head and I say stars, he didn't pull his punch, bastard. When I woke it was to a familiar ceiling, the sounding noises were almost soothing. The clashing chakra was like a campfire in the night, the woods and its inhabitants resting for the night. I sat up looking about the room. I smiled upon smelling the scent of lavender. I walked into the garden enjoying the fresh air. While the scent of lavender was lovely, prolonged exposure to it causes effects. All of which I didn't want upon myself. Sakura-chan. Suzuki rushed out of the house and slammed into me. We landed on the ground in a heap of limbs. I smiled, holding him while I still could. These moments I would cherish. Hey, Sasuke-kun, I greeted once he was straddling me. You ready for an epic sleepover? I teased. His face lit up and my heart stopped. Can't wait, Naruto is gonna come too, right? I could the tail end of his conversion, still stunned. Yes, of course. I replied, wouldn't be much fun without sunshine to brighten the night. I smiled, though Sasuke frowned for a moment. It was gone before I could read into it. Alright, you two, let's get you going. Mikoto stepped out holding a small backpack. Hello, sleepyhead. She smiled at me. Her cheeks flushed and I felt satisfied seeing her shift uncomfortably. Broken brain is more like it. I stood as Sasuke got off me. Father is a dangerous man. I apologize on his behalf. She was too good for this world. Where is he anyway? I asked, looking about. I knew where he was and from his chakra exactly what he was doing. I fought the victorious smile that threatened. He's having a bath. His shift is down for the day, so. She explained. Ah, baths, I hummed in pleasure. Warm water licking your skin. Steams all around, toasty, hot, and. I watched as Mikoto crossed her legs. Sasuke, we should have a bath together. I'll wash your back. Sasuke looked my way, oblivious to the world around him. Yeah, he said okay. Nodding, I walked over to Mikoto and took the back from her. Maybe you could wash father's back too. I said innocently. Mom and dad are always doing it, though they take longer when they doing it. I hummed, we might have to go in before them. I skipped away, grabbing Sasuke's hand and making my escape. We waved saying our goodbyes and we left the property. Before we disappeared around the corner, Mikoto dashed back into the house. Her chakra was a wildfire. My plan was successful, it seems. They would know someone did something, but that couldn't be helped. I listened to Sasuke's rant about his big brother as we made our way to the park where Dad and Naruto waited for us. Shinobi are taught how to identify alien substances by taste, smell and sight. What I did was disguise the alien substances as perfume. The scent of lavender was so overwhelming none would think there to be another beneath it. If you smelled it for long enough you could figure out there was another scent below it, but by then it's too late. Sassafras was a plant used to make ecstasy in my old world. It has a sweet smell that I disguise with lavender. It works by both smell and touch. I spilled some on Fugaku when I hugged him. Having some on my hands, I was sure to touch his skin with it. When he touched the back of my neck, he had it transferred to his palm. Fugaku doesn't make a habit of touching people, so I didn't have to worry about casualties. He always touched Mikoto on the shoulder when he returned from a long day. Having to put up with me was hard enough. With me unconscious and the scent of lavender filling the house, it was only a matter of time before it took effect. I won this round. Now all that was left was the waiting game. Shame I wasn't done yet. I'm gonna rip their plan apart one brick at a time. Thoughts went back to what Fugaku said about war and some people not going. Those unable or unwilling. Hey? I could work with that. Naruto waved upon seeing us, his smile as bright as the sun, and very contagious. This was a step in the right direction. I took Sasuke's and ran over to them. This was a step towards my happy ending.